The Mormon fundamentalist killers Dan and Don Lafferty claimed they were following a revelation from God when they killed Brenda Lafferty and her 15-month-old daughter Erica. On a summer day in 1984, the brothers had made their way to their brother's apartment in American Fork, Utah, with a mission in mind. Claiming to be moved by the will of God, they broke into the apartment and brutally murdered both their sister-in-law and their niece. The brothers long insisted that they'd only been following divine instruction, but as their trial unfolded, it became clear that they were driven to murder by several motives, including their Mormon fundamentalism and their thirst for revenge. Born into the Mormon faith in 1940, Ron and Dan came of age in Payson, Utah with 4 brothers, 2 sisters, and their parents, Warren and Claudine. She was submissive and he was prone to fits of anger. He would hit his wife and once beat the family dog to death in front of his children. He was extreme in other ways too. He was distrustful of conventional medicine, and Warren waited until one of his daughter's appendices burst before agreeing her to take her to the hospital. When one of his sons accidentally shot him in the stomach with an arrow, Warren forbade him from getting any help until the following day because he'd broken the Sabbath. Don Lafferty considered his father a superb role model who centered his life around family and faith. He felt blessed to be raised in a very special and happy family. He never wanted anything else. He believed his parents truly loved and cared for one another. Within their family, Dan became especially close to his older brother, Ron. They had similar short tempers and growing issues with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Dan began to believe that the mainstream Mormon church had made a mistake by abandoning polygamy. Ron came to accept Dan's stance, which led his wife to leave him and take their 6 children to Florida. By the 80s, Ron and Dan Lafferty, excommunicated from the church, had joined a polygamist cult called the School of Prophets. They grew their hair long and started to see themselves as the church's true leaders. Then Ron began to claim that he'd communicated with God. In March 1984, he received divine instruction from God. He wanted Ron to murder the people he felt had wronged him. His sister-in-law Brenda, who had helped his wife leave, Chloe Lowe, who'd supported his wife, and Richard Stowe, the man who had presided over his excommunication. Ron wrote down God's message on a yellow legal pad and showed it to his brother Dan. The message soon called the removal revelation. Dan claimed that Ron was initially frightened by the revelation. According to him, he told his brother, "All I can say is make sure it's from God. You don't want to act on commandments that are not from him, but at the same time you don't want to offend him by refusing to do his work." After consulting the Book of Mormon, they both decided to obey. They resolved to starting with their 24-year-old sister-in-law and her 15-month-old daughter. Brenda married Dan and Ron's youngest brother Alan. It had always rubbed them the wrong way. She was confident, beautiful, and educated. She had made it no secret of the facts that she had disagreed with their fundamentalist views. She definitely didn't agree that Ron was a prophet. A few months after he'd received the removal revelation, he and Dan put their plan into action. And on July 24, 1984, they drove to Brenda and Alan's apartment in American Fork to kill her. With 2 drifters named Charles Carnes and Richard Knapp waiting in a getaway car, Ron and Dan forced their way into the apartment. They beat her, strangled her with a vacuum cord, and cut her throat. Brenda fought back, Richard Knapp later testified. She screamed, "Don't hurt my baby, please don't hurt my baby." Then he suddenly heard that there was no more crying. For his part, Dan recalled the murder in calm, chilling detail. "I held Brenda's hair and did it pretty much the way they did it in the scriptures. Then I walked in Erica's room. I talked to her for a minute. I said, 'I'm not sure why I'm supposed to do this, but I guess God wants you home.' Then he cut the 15-month-old's throat. I like to think she didn't suffer. It probably would draw more sympathy than it does. But I don't let it." Charles testified at trial that while Dan did kill Erica, Ron killed Brenda. He recalled that as they fled the scene, Ron pulled a knife out of his pocket and banged it against his knee, saying, "I killed her over and over." Ron then turned to Dan and said, "Thank you, brother, for doing the baby because I don't think I had it in me." The brothers meant to kill even more, but when they went to Chloe's home, she wasn't there. And after they missed a turn off for Richard Stowe's home, they just kept driving onto Nevada. Dan said he would have killed them the same way, but once the next step didn't happen, he knew it wasn't meant to be. When Alan found his wife and daughter dead, he had no doubts about who had killed them. Ron and Dan had shared the revelation with him, but he had not taken it seriously. His brothers were then arrested a month later in Reno, Nevada. Following their arrests, they were both charged with 2 counts of criminal homicide, 2 counts of aggravated burglary, and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit homicide. They were supposed to stand trial together, but Ron attempted suicide in prison, delaying his trial. At Dan's trial in January 1985, he represented himself. He was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 4 other felonies, and was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison. And when Ron was tried that April, he was also found guilty but given the death penalty. Despite years of appeals based on his mental state, the death sentence stuck. However, he died in 2019 before his execution, which was set to be, as per his request, by a firing squad.